As a matter of fact, this event comes as a result of the mutual cooperation between Taif University and King Abdulaziz City for Science and Technology. Such a cooperation will enhance and increase its strength in the future by joining arm in arm to build together hand in hand the techno park within the city of Taif and the new smart city of Taif and its new generation. Dear guests, it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome and to invite to the stage our key speakers today, the International Innovation and Entrepreneurship Board members. They are Dr-Irwin Jacobs, Dr-Hermann, Prof-Timothy, Mr-Falk, and from the other side, Mrs. Melia Villanova. Our speakers are going to share with us their experiences in this field. The talk will be moderated by Dr-Naif.
The Vice President of Graduate Studies and Academic Research at Taif University, dear valued guests, delegates, innovators, entrepreneurs, respected colleagues, and students. I would like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us this morning. I'm delighted to stand in front of you and introduce our distinguished guests. Today, we have 5 exceptional guests, speakers who will share their ideas, experiences, best practices, and some secrets of their successful stories. It's no secret that having this symposium in Taif University aims to encourage the innovation and the entrepreneurship amongst students and to get them involved and engaged at and from the very early stages of their lives. Also, such efforts can help students get exposed to the ability and to the reality of marketplaces after the academic experiences. The attendance of our guests may give a sense of Saudi government commitment to encourage and support the innovation and the entrepreneurship. It's very interesting to have this mix of government, private industry, academia, investment sectors meeting together to address innovation and entrepreneurship. The business out of the way, I'm pleased to introduce our valued guests, the International Innovation and Entrepreneurship Board members, Dr-Irwin Jacobs, please give him a clap. Dr-Hermann, Professor Timothy Tong, and Mr-Falk. Welcome and thanks for coming. So for today, it's intended to be a presentation. Every one of our valued speakers will have a 15-minute session, having the first speaker finishing his presentation, or 10 minutes. Every one of our valued guests will have 10 minutes session, and having the first speaker finishing his presentation, we move directly to the second speaker and so on. By the end of the presentations of our guests, we will give the opportunity for you, audience, to ask questions, depending on how the event goes. So, if you'd like to ask a question, when I call you, when I tell you this is the time to do that. You got a microphone in either side of the audience, and feel free to pick them and ask questions. Well, we will open up the symposium with Dr. Irwin Jacob. Dr. Irwin Jacob is the founder of Qualcomm Company, and he has a personal fortune of $1.5 billion US, which he has made as a self-made man. He is the epitome of the knowledge-based economy and innovation and entrepreneurship, having started $2 billion companies such as Qualcomm, as being the flagship company for monetizing intellectual property rights, in that whereas 70% of Qualcomm's revenue comes from the licensing of intellectual property rights, 90% of its profit comes from the licensing of the intellectual property rights again. Dr. Jacobs accepted first to become an advisory board member for Meyer Bloomberg's NYC Technopark, and 1 year later gave $130 million US to help make it happen. Dr. Jacobs started in telecoms and satellites, then moved to wireless technology. He then moved to medicine and is today currently the president of the Salk Institute. Dr. Jacob is also one of the first to organize the synergy between the mobile telephones and the telemedicine. So the mic is all yours, please.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear all right? Is that coming through? Give you a little history. In San Diego back in 1960, there were only a small number of institutions, but that year, in 1960, University of California, San Diego, University of California, San Diego was formed, and also the Salk Institute of Biologic Sciences. As you will see, they had a profound impact on the region. I myself moved to begin to teach and help set up an engineering school at the University of California, San Diego in 1966. In 1969, started as a consulting company, my first company, which is called Linkabit, kind of a little playful name, linking bits together, which people hadn't really thought about bits at the time. But it was essentially the first of the high-tech companies to be formed there. Now, if you look around, you see that there's a very large cluster of information companies. And so that's the same impact that, of course, CAST is hoping to have here, starting with some seed companies and then having those lead to many other companies and much activity. There are also, because of the Salk Institute starting and the university, a similar cluster of biotech companies in San Diego. So again, starting with a seed company, basically, a large number of companies have sprung up and it's very active. By the way, between the biotech, and I'll come back to this later, and wireless communications, I think there's going to be yet another major cluster which has to do with telemedicine, bringing the two fields together with sensors, etc. This will be discussed further. Okay, I mentioned that started Linkabit as a consulting company, but it began to grow, decided to take a year off from teaching to get things better organized, found that was great fun, and I left teaching to go full-time into Linkabit. One of my rationalizations in doing that is that in the university we teach a lot of theory. And there's always a question, does this theory have much application to the real world? And I want to be able to demonstrate, of course, that yes, indeed, the theory was very critical. Now, the other thing I'll mention about the beginning of the Winkabit and also then Qualcomm, we did not have a product in mind. Winkabit had started as a consulting company. We had simply the idea that we would try to be very innovative, come up with ideas that would be not a small change, but a significant change, that if we could bring it to market quickly enough, there would be a market out there. We could expand and then use the fund flow from that product to go on to the next and the next product. So it was a bootstrapping operation. Interestingly, one of our very first projects had to do with extending the ARPANET packet switch network over to Europe, and we came up with a satellite system and a protocol for doing that. It was interesting that in 1977 that the ARPANET, the satellite network, and another packet radio network were linked together using, at that time, the brand new internet protocol. And so that was the first actual use of networks using the internet. And of course, things have come a long way since. Again, looking for innovation, another product we worked on was the dual modem, which was a satellite modem actually initially to go in airplanes, but had a number of very complicated functions. And it was typically built at the time as a series of racks of equipment. And we came up with the idea of using a microprocessor, although single chip microprocessors did not exist at the time. And in particular, we came up with the idea of using a reduced instruction set microprocessor. That was probably a few years, and there'll be a lot of discussion of reduced instruction set processors, and they're in all your phones right now. But that was, I think, the very first practical use of reduced instruction set, and it was before, in fact, the work came out of the universities. We also, working with Schlumberger Corporation, they needed a way to get information back from their drilling locations to the customer location to let the customer decide whether to continue drilling or not. And we came up with a satellite terminal that was transportable, could be used by people that weren't trained, and could bring the information back. We then took that initial terminal, reduced it in cost and size, etc., and came up with what are called very small aperture earth terminals that are now used everywhere in business, etc. So that was another of the businesses. And then Home Box Office came and wanted to scramble their signal from satellite to the cable head, and we came up with a scrambling system for a professional unit. We then found our very first political issue, and of course, as you grow companies, there are regulatory issues, political, legal, a whole range above and beyond the technical aspects. The legal issue here, or the regulatory and political, people had backyard dishes they were using to receive HBO for free. If HBO scrambled the signal, they would no longer be able to receive it, so they went to Congress in the United States and said, we need to have a descrambler at home, we're willing to pay something. And so we had to go ahead and develop a descrambler for home use, inexpensive, etc. And how do you go ahead and do that? At the time, integrated circuits, a little bit of a height adjustment.
Yeah, because you're like.
That a little better? At a time, integrated circuits were actually being designed by hand, not by computer, but the first efforts at Caltech, MIT, Caltech took the lead, MIT, University of Washington, etc., to design on a computer had started. I had sent a few engineers out to learn about what is happening, bring it back, and we were going to do some homework problems, but suddenly we had to develop a commercial product with chips. We developed 3 chips with this, at that time, untested software that we had put together. All 3 chips worked the first time, and so we came up with what was called Video Cipher. Turned out to be a home run in the baseball sense of a product, and in fact is still doing very, very well. So by willing to take some chances, try to innovate, we moved ahead and had a number of very good products. However, I sold that company and retired for 3 months, and then decided to start another company with a few people that worked with me at Linkabit called Qualcomm. And again, we did not have a business plan. We didn't have a spreadsheet that showed how we were going to do over the next several years. We did not have a product in mind, but we knew that wireless would be important. We knew that digital, of course, would continue to be important. And so we took a chance that we would come up with some ideas. We would be very opportunistic, looking for opportunities and be able to move on them. And indeed, within the first 6 or 8 months, we came up with enough ideas that have kept us busy ever since. The company we started in 1985, so approaching 30 years. We came up with the idea of CDMA. I'm going to come back to that, but we didn't have money at the time to develop it. And so we developed this first product, initially for a customer, but we ended up absorbing that customer, which was a communication system for the transportation industry, continent-wide, provide communications and position location. And the interesting aspect was we thought initially you provide the technical aspect, here's a device, the communication and location device, and then let the customer figure out how best to use it. But that doesn't work. And so one has to get very much involved in your customer's business, understand that, understand how what you're doing can make a significant economic and productivity, etc., difference to them, and become very much involved in the customer's business, developing system software to integrate whatever you're doing into their product. And so it was a very good lesson to not only think technically, but market carefully and think about the economics of the situation. We've always done that ever since, successfully. When we launched that product in roughly November of 1988, we then came back to look at what's called Code Division Multiple Access, CDMA, for use in cellular networks. And at the time, the industry had decided to go with a different technology called TDMA, Time Division Multiple Access. I won't go into the technology, but they had made that decision moving ahead and did not want to hear about another technology. So there was battles over the next several years over introducing CDMA. The first thing we had to do was do a demonstration that issues that people in laboratories around the world had encountered in looking at CDMA and thrown up their hands and said, this is not doable, it's not going to be commercial, and had not proceeded. And so we built a small network and a mobile phone. You can see from the picture the mobile phone required a van to drive it around. Well, it was mobile, perhaps. But we showed that the problems that existed with CDMA, that we had solutions for them. Well, why was that important? With TDMA, one had ability to increase the number of subscribers in a given amount of radio spectrum by about a factor of 3 at best. With CDMA, we said we could go 10 to 20, actually we're up to about 50 at the present time. So it was a more efficient use of the spectrum. That got some of the operators interested in this possibility because they had limited spectrum. How are they able to go ahead and make better use of that spectrum? And so we came up with what I call an innovation in business plans. We needed to finance the development of chips to be able to make a mobile phone and commercial-sized base station, but that took a lot of dollars. How could we get those dollars on a very risky proposition? And so the operators put a little pressure on their manufacturers, and we negotiated a licensing arrangement where we would license the use of CDMA to the different manufacturers in exchange for an upfront payment and a royalty on each phone that's sold if they ever became commercial, which people did not think was too likely. Small enough royalty so that the industry would grow if it in fact did happen. With that, we were able to develop the 3 chips that we could put into a mobile phone. We called everybody back 2 years later to see that we now had a commercial-sized phone, commercial-sized base stations, very effective, and we were able then to convince the industry to go ahead and standardize on CDMA as well as on TDMA, and some networks to move ahead with it. In fact, the first, after we went through a standards process so that we could be international, the first commercial network went live in Hong Kong in November of '95. So it was 7 years from the time we went to develop the product, go through a standards process, commercialize it, etc. Interesting thing is that nobody else was willing to build phones at that time because they thought it was too risky. So the phones that went into the commercial network in Hong Kong and then a few months later into two commercial networks in South Korea were built in San Diego. We built them and shipped them for these commercial networks until other companies would come up to speed. Well, I think many of you know about Moore's Law, that the number of transistors that you can put on a small piece of silicon roughly doubles each 2 years, and so as a result one can get more and more capability. And so the chips that go in your phones right now are very powerful. By the way, if you're carrying a phone, there's a very high chance that the chip inside, at least one of them, is made by Qualcomm. So it's a very key part of our business area. But we've been able to move ahead and put a large amount of computing power, this will also be discussed later, using reduced instruction set processors and ARM instruction set, but very powerful DSPs, put on all the local communications, put on graphics capability, very powerful graphics capability for those who want to play games on their phones. All types of capability on single chips. And to give you a feeling of the progress, I show off to the right here a VAX 11780 built by Digital Equipment Company. First came out in 1977. It was a wonder at the time of computing capability. The computer on the chip in your phone runs as if it were 10,000 of those VAXs. So you can see the progress we've made, and that's going to continue for a few more generations. As a result of having these type of capabilities in smart devices, mobile is now the largest ever technology platform. There's over 6 billion connections out there, and that's out of perhaps 7 billion plus people in the world. And so clearly very, very popular, makes the possibilities of having all types of applications economically exciting, and as far as the ability to make use of them, also very exciting. And that's just going to continue because we keep adding capabilities. And again, as will be discussed further, we're moving to the fact that you'll have wireless chips with intelligence and very little energy being used in a whole variety of devices. The first of these perhaps that came out was the e-reader that Amazon came out with. And that had a chip inside that allowed the reader to talk back to Amazon actually via for the first year or so, via Qualcomm's control center up to Seattle. But it was a wireless connection that gave you the order for the book and then transmitted the book back to the device. So machine to machine, you didn't realize there was a cellular network involved. Similar things are happening with many different devices, with automobiles, more and more wireless in automobiles. So in fact, you'll be able to judge, or the car will be able to judge what's happening 2 or 3 cars ahead and get rid of these slowdowns. Energy distribution, home distribution, a whole range of different capabilities for having the so-called Internet of Everything. One of the areas has to do with biosensors, mobile health. A lot of new companies starting up to build sensors that either can be on the phone itself and scan, or a Band-Aid, or these days, of course, with nano devices, swallowing them. Having those talk back to the phone, provide information that can be processed by these computers in the phone, get rid of the noise, understand the signal, and then tell you something about your health or alarm the family or the doctor as necessary. I think it's going to be the next major growth area, already started. New techniques, again, augmented reality. Here one can use your phone cameras, but if you have Google Glass or equivalent, the glasses or other device, but in any case, augmented reality, where what you see in the picture is different than what's out there, almost the same. In the US, with US football, they draw a line showing the 10-yard line that you need to pass. That's not really there, but if you're watching it on TV, you can see that. Now, in places where you go, you may not recognize the language. You can hold up the phone and have it translated into language you do recognize. Again, recognizes the location. A capability that I'm very anxious to have has to do with you come into a new setting, you know the person, you can't quite remember the name of the last time you were together. Hold the phone up, it recognizes the person, tells you the name, tells you the last occasion, and makes up for an aging memory and helps your social skills a bit. Set of other things that are happening. I mentioned smart glasses. There are also now smart watches. I happen to be wearing one. This Qualcomm Talk smart watch. A key aspect for a watch is not only intelligence, ability to talk to your phone and get more information, but also to be visible at all times. And so these watches have a reflective technology called Mirasol, and so they can stay on all times. So you never have to do anything. The watch is always there available for you to look at. How do you charge it? Wireless charging. You put it in the case that it came with, that's shown on the right, and it automatically charges. And so you get a capability with full color, with motion capability, visible in full sunlight. At night, it does have a lighting capability, and it also has a touch screen. These are just beginning to be developed. Applications that are on your phone are available, but also many additional applications are becoming available. We started with wireless charging for phones, but that of course gets you, once you come up with an interesting technology, into looking at it for automobiles. And in fact, there's now been electric car racing that's been just launched, and we do the charging. The idea, right now we're putting stationary chargers in a number of parking locations in London where a car can come, park, and be recharged while you're away, and you come back and you have more charge. But you can also, of course, use it for racing. The ultimate idea is to have a number of these plates buried, and so you can be charged as you're driving along. And of course, one place to do that initially is the racetrack. Let me finish up with one last area in education. Back in the year 2000, I was with President Clinton in North Carolina. We were talking about issues with the digital divide, and the issue was how do you bring high-speed internet access, and that was done using what is now commercial. We told President Clinton and Governor Hunt we would come back when it was commercial and do something for the state. We set up, provided smartphones to students in 4 high schools. There was one amazing result. There was a teacher with a class with phones, a class without the phones. The class with the phones, 100% of the kids passed their Algebra 1. Without the phones, only 2/3 passed. The key was that they had the phones at all times, 24/7, a lot of peer-to-peer communication. So very, very important. So thank you. One just last note. Company is now 30,000, I think among the 50th most valuable companies in the world. How do you keep innovation going at a large company? So one thing I always tell employees is to continue to think of Qualcomm as a startup, but a startup with a very good cash flow. Thank you.